Good day, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for a special episode of Splints and Whiskey. I have been pumped about this episode for several weeks now, and I've got to tell you that I think the listeners, you guys are just as pumped. I could tell by the feedback, and I can tell by what you've been giving me back when I've been giving you these teasers because this is an awesome, awesome episode. So, today I have with me two superstars to our community. Number one, Dennis Lyons. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, but Dennis Lyons, household name in special ops, you guys will know him. And then Brian Gerard. Brian Gerard is from Tier 1 Group. Awesome, awesome dude. He's going to introduce himself as well. I am not hosting today. I am just sheerly no, I'm the host for a second. And then I'm the moderator and or excuse me, I'm giving it over to Dennis to be the moderator. And I can't wait just to hear what these guys have to say. There is so much to learn here that we're going to keep this episode on for longer than usual. So I'm super super excited because we talk about medical training here, and we talk about the importance of medical training, where training once was, where it's going in the future, and where it is today, right? And sometimes it's even, should it go back? So we're going to have some awesome conversations. Prior to doing that and me passing over the baton to Dennis, I just want to say thank you to our sponsor, Life Autonomous Care Consultants. Life Autonomous Care Consultants is a company that sells tactical gear and training to the DoD and to first responders. So we are a huge support of Tier 1 Group, and we totally believe in their spectacular training. If you want to find the body of believers and our triad, we've got a 501c3 that gives to first responders. We have Splints and Whiskey, the podcast, and then of course we've got the Prophet that sells gear. Then you can reach out to www.thelizarts.com. And that is it. There's my shameless plug. Now, I, without further ado, am honored to introduce my dear friend Dennis Lyons and ask you to please take it away.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. And thanks for having me back on. We did a podcast with Sam a couple months ago. Went well. It was fun just sitting around talking. And, like I said, you get two soft medics in a room. What do they talk about? Well, everything and anything. So thanks for having me back. And this should be a fun one today. So a little bit about me, if you don't want to go back and watch the podcast from before where I give a full background, but 20 something years as a soft medic, as a medic in the Army. I spent time as an infantry guy, as an infantry medic, and spent some time in the hospitals, and then spent basically the rest of my career, the last 15 years in SOF, and got to do a lot of neat things around a lot of neat people. And that's actually what transitioned us into today. I met the folks at Tier 1 Group. One of the lead site leads was actually the course director when I was in the Special Operations Combat Medical course, and then remembered me, and we just kind of worked together for a bunch of years now. I can't even count how many, but it's before 2010, so it's been a long time. So Brian Gerard from T1G. I'll let you do a quick introduction, and then I got a few questions for you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And like Dennis said, you get two soft medics in a room and they'll talk forever. So I will try my best to focus on just a couple things that I think are important. And um, but a little bit about myself. I was a Navy corpsman. I did just over 20 years, and I did all my time with the Marines. I started off at 2nd Recon Battalion, and so I did all my time with recon units and then MARSOC at the end. And so there's different, the term SARC you'll sometimes hear, or SOIDC. So that it's the recon corpsman and MARSOC corpsman pipeline has evolved a little bit during that time. So I lived through a lot of that. But that was my whole time. I was with the Marines my entire time. I had one short stint with the with the Navy, and it was at the dive school, working at the Marine Combat Dive School. So I still, even at a Navy command, was still under the Marines. So I did. I got out and came to work immediately at Tier 1 Group. So Tier 1 Group started in 2006. They didn't actually start doing any training till 2007, but they were originally started off as a weapons and tactics company. That was what they were primarily focused on. One of the original employees did my job when he was in as well. He was a SARC, and he said, "Hey, look, we can't just focus on marksmanship and CQB and breaching. We got to do medical training too." And so early on, they pulled in and developed a medical training division. And this was 2007, and that's when it really took off. I was still on active duty at the time, but I got out right after that and started working for T1G. And so Tier 1 Group is, like I said, primarily weapons and tactics, breaching, tactical driving, and full mission profile stuff. So anything that fits in there. And then medical is brought on. But then in addition to that, T1G is an actual training facility. So early on it wasn't. They were trying to build a facility. In that process of trying to build a facility, starting medical facility, a current facility came open. They purchased it, and we've been there ever since. I think it was we moved on board in August of 2008 and leased it, and then officially purchased it in March of 2009. The dates might be a little bit off there. That's about right. I started full time in January of 2009. I did a little bit of work when I was still in my last year. And then, as far as we have our dedicated cadre. So we had all full-time instructors for each of these disciplines. And the medical took off so fast that it wasn't just one lead instructor and a bunch of part-time guys. We had multiple lead instructors. And all of our cadre was previously an instructor at JSOM-TC, like Dennis, like you had said, with most of them being in some type of senior role. They were in charge there in whatever role it was. And we had a pretty good spread of guys. We had some SEALs, some Navy from the Marine side, and Army and Air Force, all on board. I was probably the lone guy that was not a JSOM-TC instructor. I'm not sure how I got the job, but I think at that time, pretty much everybody else came from instructing duty at JSOM-TC. And so that's a lot of the guys, our cadre. We couldn't do everything. We can't be everywhere. And medical was really just taking off. So we relied on our part-time instructors, and we tried to keep it to a small groups that we were using the same guys each time. And that's really where I knew Dennis from. Dennis has almost been with T1G as long as me. I think you came on board as a part-timer not long after I was there.
It's been a while.
Yes, we've known each other for quite a while. But for those of you that do know Dennis or watch the previous podcast, that's the caliber of guys we were looking to get as our part-time instructors, which we really relied heavily on. And especially trying to keep guys that were current, meaning they just got out, and so they're really fresh in what's being done right now, or they're staying current in some other role. These guys are continuing to do some type of medical job or medical training in the outside. So we tried to do that as best we could. So that's really the intro about myself and Tier 1 Group. That's kind of it.
So Brian, you mentioned something there, and I kind of want to dig into it, that T1G started out as a weapons and tactics company, but we all know that in military operations, medical has to be a part of the everyday, tactics, because if it's not, generally bad things happen. And I used to say that the people that do it really, really well integrate their medical operations in with their regular planning, and certainly I saw that well executed in the Rangers. When you guys are teaching at a T1G and a unit or an organization comes out and they say, hey, we want to do a full mission profile, do they always include medical, or is it kind of an afterthought or something you have to nudge them towards? How does that go
So,
today?
so I'm gonna go ahead and give the punchline right now. So anybody that can only watch 5 minutes of the podcast, they can turn it off after this. But
Yeah.
and I'm gonna come back to this. Um, to me, everybody always wants to do something advanced. I want advanced medical training.
Yeah.
That whether they've got the basics down or not, they wanted it to be advanced. To me, advanced medical training is just doing the basic medical training, but doing it in a full mission profile scenario. Um, so I'll go ahead and get that out of there. But I am going to come back to that. To more directly answer your question, Dennis, that's a great question. The we have both sides of it. We have some guys that are coming there just for medical training, and we
Yeah.
always try to encourage them, do a crawl, walk, run, get the basics down, but you eventually need to be doing this and 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 putting it into a full mission profile.
Yeah.
Have your gear, your comms, your vehicles, your higher headquarters include it all. But then on the other side, the people that are just coming for a full mission profile, um, for the most part, it's a little bit anecdotal. I would say there's probably 60% of them want to include some type of medical,
Yeah.
uh, which I think is great, because looking back, which is what we're talking about, the evolution of medical training. Looking back to when I first came in, that would have been much lower. I don't have a data to show, but that would have been much lower. There was no T1G back then, but I would have said it's probably 5% of the people coming out want to
Yeah.
integrate medical training. And I know you and I have talked about this before a lot, and there's some units out there, and without getting into names, there's some units out there that are always doing good medical training. Like
Yeah.
they include it in everything. There's some that don't do any, and then there's that big group in the middle that some of their guys do it, some of them don't. It's not really regimented all that well, but there's some guys out there that include medical training in everything they do. They take it very seriously, and it shows. They
Yeah.
come train with us, and it shows. So I wish that number was higher. But of that group of people that do ask to implement medical training into their full mission profiles, it runs the gamut. Some of them are, they just want something really fast, just to say they, kind of almost an afterthought. Yeah, let's put
Yep.
something medical in there. And then some of them come out there and it's, they got the checklist of things they want to do, and medical's right there at the top. Like, make
Yeah.
sure we get, medical casualties implemented into the full mission profile. So
Yeah.
I
Because I think we learned early on in the GWAT, and it's, again, Rangers and other units like that, they pretty much said, hey, a casualty event is a tactical problem, not the other way, not the other way around. And guess who's working hard when it's a casualty problem? It's not just the medic. For a lot of years we used to just think, well, the medic's got it. Well, the medic doesn't have it, because guess what? A medic can't carry a litter by himself. I personally, let's just be honest, I spent 10 years of the early part of my career as a medic thinking I was going to be calling in a 9-line medevac, and I was just crushed when I realized that wasn't my job, right? That I was actually taking care of a patient. So it took a little while for those things to happen, but yeah, a casualty event is a tactical problem, and it's got to be addressed by the entire team. That's why those units that do it really, really well, they train their leaders what to do in a casualty event. And it's critical, for things to go well. So yeah, it's nice to see that number is bumping up there. It should be 100%, because as we've seen, the units that do it well have very little or no preventable death. They require their medics to do AARs afterwards, and all sorts of other things to learn. So a casualty event just isn't contained. The rest of the organization and the rest of the the rest of the military and world learns from the mistakes that were made, or the successes or the good things that were done. So yeah, that's so
Yeah,
Brian,
and
let's
you,
oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, I hate to interrupt, but you were,
Yeah.
a couple things you said there is the medical problem is not just the casualty and the medic interfacing. It's everything.
Yeah.
Like you said, the nine line, everybody has to know how to get the reports down, move the casualty, everybody. That's why it's got to be implemented. And a quick little story. I was deployed, and it was with an SF team, and early on. So this particular incident happened pretty early on. So we'd done a couple missions with them, but we had a mass cal event, and uh, it we plan things out, but this you don't plan mass cal out necessarily. The way this happened, but during that, within the first minute or so, I'm looking up, and of course the medics are doing stuff, but it was all the other Marines that were with me, all the other SF guys that were with me. Everybody was doing something,
Hmm.
and within it was probably within a couple minutes or so, the team sergeant from that team had this big dry erase board, and he had a list of stuff, triage stuff already written down.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, nobody told him to do that. He knew already. He's got experience. So these guys showed me right then. These guys had planned to do that. He's got that. Uh, Not long after that, I see his comm guy come walking over with his radios and stuff on, talking to him. They're already calling this stuff in.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can't be. Medical training is good, putting on the tourniquet, patching holes, but it can't stop there. It's got to be, how do we track these guys? How do we record this?
Yeah.
How do we make sure this guy gets CASEVAC properly? And everybody's got to be involved, because the one thing we forget too is, it's not just about you want to do the point of injury care all the way up to the casualty evacuation, and how that goes and how you report it, how you track it, how you keep track of all your people. But the thing that we forget is part of that medical training should include completing the mission.
Yes.
So a unit shouldn't go, hey, this just turned into a medical casualty evacuation. It should be, we got a CASEVAC going. We also have to complete the mission. So
Yeah.
it's one of those important things that you should be training for. So
And that's part of wrapping into the full mission profile. I mean, you still you perform the CASEVAC and you still complete the mission, whatever the mission was. Yeah. So let's talk. You talked a little bit about there, and you touched on, some basics in training, and you know advanced medical training is not always what we think it is. Let's talk about T-C specifically, because as I look through the list and what's approved at the 4 tier levels for all those, they're pretty basic for all the levels. Even for the everybody, it's very basic stuff. Apply a tourniquet, use combat gauze, you know, hypothermia. It's all very, very basic stuff. And even when you move up, even when you get into the CLS and the all are very, very very, very similar. When you talk about the all the way down to breathing, it's just, perform a needle D or a needle thoracostomy. That's the only difference really between everybody and then your combat lifesaver. And it's similar when you go from the combat medic to the combat paramedic. Um, it's very simple. Combat paramedic being the soft ATPs, the 18 deltas, and the others, PJs and whatnot. They're very similar skill sets with some slight differences. But when you're at that level, it's all still really pretty basic. So I think that advanced, I want to do an advanced T-C. I think you're right. It's wrapping in the other things that are around the exercise, because the actual T-C is very basic for the most part. They're things that we all learn in in basically our indoctrination training or whatever course that we go to. It's all things that we already learn. What we don't necessarily learn in all of those is wrapping it into a full mission profile, all of those other things that go along. And that's where you pretty much have to get your, your leaders on board. So let's dive in a little bit into the basics of TCCC. When someone says, "Hey, Brian, I got a bunch, my first responders, me and my team, I've got one medic and, 10 guys, let's do an advanced medical training." So what would that look like for you? Like if Brian ran the zoo and I could make that course look like whatever I wanted to look like, and I had, let's say it's a team at MARSOC, just run me down what that training would look like.
So that's a lot. Uh,
Yeah, it's a big question. That's why we got an hour and a half.
you said we have an hour and a half. All right. This is going to pretty
Yeah.
much wrap that in. No, it's a great question. And there's, you know,
So
part of my role at T1G is making sure we give great training. And that always starts with what the client's needs are, so we always have to kind of fall back on, hey, it's what their requirements are. What are they asking us to do? Some of what we need to do is help educate them, because they may or may not know what the best training is. So we do have to interject a little bit there and help them out, because we get guys that are like, hey, I want an advanced medical course. And I'm like, all right, tell me what you think advanced is. And he's like, I want my guys doing IVs and crikes and chest tubes. I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
you guys, who are you?
Yeah, not in their scope of practice.
And then I want to do amputations, and I want to learn how to push, it's like, so it's way outside their scope of practice, or it doesn't involve items that they don't have, which is, doesn't mean they shouldn't get trained on some of this stuff, depending on who they are. But yeah, if I could, I would take guys and make sure they get the basics in. And that's just like you said, all the March algorithm, just stick with the basics, do it in a crawl, walk, run fashion, so that you're not, too often we take guys and you overload them right off the bat, thinking, well, they need to get under stress. They got to be, but if they didn't learn it and you're just stressing them out, now they're certainly not going to learn it now. So
Yeah.
it really needs to start off with that crawl, walk, run phase, and build them up to it. But that's what I would do. I would really highly encourage them to stick with the basics, and then go from doing the basics good to rolling it into some situational training exercises, to
Yeah.
bringing in their comms, to bringing in higher headquarters, even if it's a not their real higher, having somebody on a radio somewhere that they can
Yeah.
talk to, and some movement. I would really try to focus on making them do that.
Yeah.
Now there's some things outside that you might want to do that they would consider advanced, depending on their mission. Some guys are going to be in remote areas where they might need something that is probably a little bit more advanced.
Yeah.
So it's always a fair one to take that into consideration. Again, in my job, I can't, if some Marine comes to me and says, I want to learn, X, Y, and Z, I can't just randomly start teaching them.
Yeah.
Put guys on them. I have to make sure it's within their scope of practice, or they're signed off from their command to be able to do it, because it doesn't do any good to learn some advanced technique one time and they have no way of doing sustainment training for it.
Exactly.
It's a kind of a waste. But I will say this for I don't want to get too much into what guys' scope of practice should and shouldn't be. That's for the military to decide, and they do a good job of that. I think they have pretty clear cut delineation there. But there is something to be said for sometimes doing things that are maybe a little bit outside their scope of practice. IVs is the example I use, because you and I both lived through the IVs, two large bore wide open, and
yes.
Thank God we got away from that. But there was a time when for me, it was the Marines. If they weren't sticking IVs in each other's arms, it was not advanced training.
I know. Yeah, absolutely.
But if you were doing IVs, it didn't matter what else you did. You could do the most basic TCCC course and then stick IVs in them, and that was the most advanced thing ever.
Everybody,
it was Coolest
Yeah,
thing that ever
everybody was
happened.
happy.
And I used to be against it. I was like, my Marines be like, I want to learn how to do an IV, and I'm like,
Yeah.
like, but there's something to be said for it. When if a Marine is going to stick a needle in another Marine's arm, he becomes hyper focused on training
Yes,
at that point.
absolutely.
So there is absolutely something to be said. It's like free fall training.
Yep.
Static line jump school guys are like, their eyes are rolling back of their head. They know they just got to walk out the door. Get to free fall school, and it's like you're going to pack your own parachute, and all of a sudden they're like, hold on, let's go back through this again.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Can we slow down for a second, please?
yeah,
Yeah,
and let me tell you, man, those
absolutely.
guys are hyper focused on learning. Same thing with IV training. If that
Yeah,
dude's looking to the Marine to his left and right, he's like, that dude's sticking a needle in my vein. Not only is he paying attention, he's making sure his buddies are paying attention. So, and
yeah,
and that and that bleeds over into all the other stuff you're getting ready to teach them. Now, teach that at the end of make that the last thing you teach, because then they're paying attention to everything
yeah,
else. Like, what's
absolutely.
hypothermia? They know everything there is to know about hypothermia because they're getting ready to stick a needle in their buddy's arm.
Yeah,
So there are some benefits to it.
yeah,
Although will have to say I'm generally against doing anything advanced techniques
yeah.
when they're unneeded.
And that kind of changed a few years ago. We used to, early days of my career, everybody learned how to do IVs. And it was even when I was going through the course where, and I learned this because I worked for a couple of years in an emergency room, where I was, before I was even in SOF and as an infantry medic. What I learned was it's like, yeah, and it just sounds common sense that every minute post injury IV access gets harder and harder. That's why I broke up that, do an IV to, gain vascular access versus fluid resuscitation. Those are two separate tasks. So it's
Yeah,
like, and now when it comes to blood transfusions, there's, the venous access or the vascular access portion of blood transfusions should be something that should already, all we're doing is sustainment training at that point. We shouldn't be doing anything
yeah,
new. Blood
yeah,
transfusion, the hard part is juggling all the tubes and the bags and making sure you do all that stuff right. Um, so you talked about, and I do, there was, back to talking about basics, because if you don't do the basics well, you don't get to the next phase of care. If you don't do basics well in that TCCC phase, you don't get to do CASEVAC. You don't get to
yeah,
do prolonged field care. You don't get to damage control resuscitation. You don't get to launch stool Germany or Tripler or wherever you're going.
yeah,
The algorithm stops with not the basics if you do the basics poorly. So it's funny because early on, right when there was a unit that was standing up, an Army unit, and T1G was contracted to go teach them prolonged field care. And very quickly, me and a couple of the other folks that were there teaching them realized that they're not real strong on TCCC. And we can't even have a discussion about prolonged, well, extended care, prolonged field care, whatever we were calling it at the time, prolonged casualty care now. We couldn't even have that discussion because we didn't even understand the basics. And it was like, look, we've got to step you guys back and we got to do a 3 or 4 day TCCC refresher because you're not going to see any prolonged casualty care patients or prolonged field care patients because
you're not
you
gonna have
didn't do
them.
you didn't do the basics well, right? I was shocked. It was simple. I mean, this was a regular Army unit, but it was very basic stuff. Like the basic TCCC algorithms were not there, right? And algorithm acquisition can be done many ways. You can do that. This is where I'm going to geek out a little bit on simulation modalities, but I don't need a full mission profile to learn TCCC algorithms.
Yeah,
That's a computer learning game, right? That the computer learning game does that. AR VR does that.
I was gonna
And
say they
then
got some good VR stuff
yeah,
now
there's
just to
a
run through it.
million different ways to get those algorithms. So I think that's the other thing. It's a lot of folks want to be like, we've been doing TCCC. And what do some people think TCCC is nothing but putting on a tourniquet and stuffing combat gauze in a wound. Oh, that's two components of about 30 out of a list, right? There's a lot of those critical tasks in there. So that's why I kind of like I just want to talk about that on focusing on the basics, that if you don't do the basics well, you don't get to that next fair, whether it's, or that next phase, whether it's prolonged casualty care, evacuation, damage control resuscitation, or going back home to mom and dad. You don't
Yeah,
get
and
there
there's
without teachable C.
yeah, and from my time at T1G, I can same thing you're saying. We've seen it over and over and over again. It's always, we get the phone call from the unit. It's like, hey, my guys are really good at this, and so they're really good at this level. I want to start at this level, and it almost there was a couple times when I was really impressed with the level guys showed up, but about 99% of the other times,
Yeah,
they wherever they thought they were, they really needed to just go back to ground zero, and
yeah,
that's just the way it was. And it was, um, it's it's good though, because that way we could kind of assess them, and you could show them right away, like, man, I know you expected to get this done, but you guys got to back up. You got to start with the basic, the
yeah,
TCCC, and almost every single time that's the way it's been, with a couple exceptions.
yeah,
There's been a few exceptions. I had guys that they, and for the most part, those exceptions, they told me they were at this level. They said, hey, we're at level 1, and they
yeah,
showed up, a couple rungs above that, and I'm like, we can speed this up, which is one of the good things about T1G. We're very flexible in our
yeah,
training. So, guys show up and think they need to start somewhere. We can do quick assessments and we can back them up. And even within a unit, sometimes there's guys who are a little bit faster than the others, and we can break them up into ability groups. We do that all the time.
yeah,
Take some of the guys, and then if guys show up that are better than they told us they were going to be, we can jump ahead, and get more training in. So that's one of the good things that we've liked to do. I I had a guy ask me one time. He was like, "So what do you do at T1G?" And I said, "Well, I was pretty new. I was still an instructor. I wasn't like a sales guy or anything, so I didn't have some
yeah,
pitch ready for him.
yeah,
But it I'd already thought of it. I'm like, and we had talked about it. We were doing a CQB course for some guys, and so this guy asked me, and he's like, "What do you do at T1G?" And I said, I give guys the training that I wish I'd have got when I was in. So I always just went, you know, whatever these guys were trying to do, I thought about my time. I'm like, man, I know what they're trying to do. Here's what I wish I would have got. So we always tried to make sure we were doing that,
yeah.
whether it's increasing the realism or increasing repetitions or going more in depth on some things, less in depth on others. Yeah, that's what we
Yeah. So you hit
have.
earlier, we've kind of beat to death the basics, but I think the one thing we
We're
can
not
agree
done.
on is, say again?
We're not done.
Yeah, we're not done. But the one thing we can agree about, that even though they're basic skills and they're not hard, I look through the list and it's like, yeah, 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 yeah. But the one thing is they're all perishable skills, right?
Yeah.
And you talked about sustainment. I've seen us make the mistake a lot of times where we do a bunch of advanced training, but then with no plan to sustain it. And the more critical the skill, the more important it becomes to do sustainment training. Something like
Yeah.
put on a tourniquet, which is so easy to do in a team room or anywhere else. It's still a critical task, and guys are always like, putting on a tourniquet isn't something I need to sustain. It's not critical until you turn the lights off and then put them on their back and they're not allowed to use their right hand and they got to put it on their left leg. When you start doing things that could happen in real life, or that, there's all sorts of situations. Yeah, me putting on a tourniquet sitting here in my office chair, yeah, it's not hard. Yeah, I can do
Yeah.
it with my eyes closed, but let's turn the lights out. Let's make it cold. Let's make you losing
Or,
some blood, and let's put you
or
on your side, in a
yeah.
confined space.
Or
Um,
just put time in between when you do it. The more
yeah,
time that goes by, the less proficient you're going to do. You wouldn't go to a unit and tell them, don't do dry practice.
yeah,
Like, just wait till you go to the range next.
yeah,
Nobody, no, no legitimate soft operator would just say, I don't need to do dry practice. I'll just wait till the next mission, pull my gun out and ready to go.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. You got to practice. As time goes by, you're doing so many other things. Even as a medic, medics don't just sit around and put tourniquets on. You
Yeah.
gotta practice those things, and so there does need to be, and this is on the unit. This isn't us. I can't make somebody do sustainment training.
Yeah.
The unit's just gotta really, um, it's got to be a priority for them to do sustainment training. And that can be anything from just getting quick classes, getting
Yeah.
the didactic portion down, to hands-on stuff, that those hands-on skills are perishable.
Yeah.
Like,
Let's think about sustainment, medical sustainment training in relation to all the other training we do in the military. I think about, our class at JSOMTC, depending on when you went, it was either 6 or 10 months. And then we go back and we have to do a refresher every 2 years. How many other soft MOSs have to go back and do an MOS level refresher? I don't know of any that do that. I
yeah,
mean, the guys, could you imagine if you had to go back and do a Ranger school refresher every 2 years, or you didn't get to wear your tab? You know how many
yeah,
tab guys you'd see running around? Not many,
yeah,
So, that's one of it just shows the importance of sustainment on medical tasks is that it really is the 18 Delta or the 8427. I don't know what they're using for
yeah.
SARCs now, but
Yeah, they have different.
whatever they are, it was 27, 25, but whatever the MOS is, we're all required. If you went through that course once, you're required to go through every 2 years to refresher, to stay
Yeah,
current and to maintain your currency to be able to deploy. There's not many other MOSs that do that. So I would say that we understand that early on. There were a couple of other Army programs. When I was a senior medic at USASOC, there were a couple other Army programs they were setting up at the time. And they said, hey, you guys do this stuff really well. It's like, and that was the first thing I'd throw out to them is like, what are you doing for sustainment? Especially since you have a civilian credential against that. It's like, you've got to think about sustainment when you're building the course itself or
yeah,
very shortly after, because by the time you get around and you get guys moving towards their certification, they're already going to be due a refresher or recert, before you're ready. So you got to really set those programs up and have the
yeah,
idea of what you're going to do to sustain those skills when you're doing the training.
yeah. Because you know, techniques change, they evolve. Um,
Absolutely.
Equipment, new equipment comes out.
Yeah.
Protocols change. So if there has to be. It can't just be, hey, we're going to practice this. We're going to practice every quarter. It's
Yeah.
got to be something more formal so that you're not. You could imagine some unit out there with a cravat and a stick for their tourniquet still because they never realized that pre-manufactured tourniquets came out. So there's new
Yeah.
equipment, there's
2000,
new protocols.
2003.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, there's definitely needs to be some type of formal sustainment, and all the way down lower at the lower level within the unit, and it's got to be consistent. And people just they have to take it seriously.
Yeah.
That's 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 all there is to it. You mentioned about those units that that do medical training really well.
Yeah.
Um, they don't take medical training seriously. They take all
All
training
training.
seriously. So
Absolutely.
there's no such thing as training that they don't take seriously. It's all
Yeah.
important to them. And you see that, because those guys are, you know, they're they're doing all their weapons drills. They're doing all their communications drills. So
Yeah.
when they show up to do a full mission profile, they're not working the bugs out.
Yeah.
You know, that they're just
Yeah.
they're just putting it all together.
You know, I like what you said about the evolution and needing to refresh every 2 years. I think it would be really funny to see like the course syllabus or sit through a sophomous C or the SOCMS C, the refresher we go through. It would be really funny if I could go back in time to 2004, 2006 when I did my first one and see what was done then. What were the new things then? That would be absolutely hilarious, because we'd still be using a Gen 1 cat with a fiberglass windlass, and I just think it would be really funny, or a Gen 1 soft T that still had, a 1 inch constricting bed. I just think it'd be really funny to be able to go through that exercise.
Yeah, well, I've thought of that, and if I had some time and could sit without my phone going off every 5 minutes over there,
Yeah.
I could probably list pretty well all the things, all the big ones, not the
Yeah.
little nuance stuff. But just like when I went through the course, there
Two
was
large
no
bore
cat.
IVs.
Cat had not been invented yet.
Yeah.
We're battle dressings and cravats, no hemostatic dressing. But even before that, me getting to the course was a little bit of a process.
Yeah.
I was supposed to, I think my original course was supposed to be in 93, and then I got, something happened, I got extended, and then on and on. So I ended up going there in 98.
Yeah.
But, so even from back in the early 90s, when I was at Recon Battalion, to get into the course, things had changed rapidly. And then from the time I went through that course, all those refreshers later,
Yeah.
was really when TCCC started coming online. So a lot of changes, and even now there's still. But so another thing, I told you I gave away the punchline at the beginning.
Yeah.
But I have another joke for you. It was and we've talked about this, is when somebody says they want an advanced course.
Yeah.
Another aspect to that is I'm initially thinking they still need TCCC. Everybody
Absolutely.
needs TCCC or
Yep.
basics. Let's say basics, whether it's TCCC or whatever. This could be any level of we do a lot of other medical training.
Yeah.
But they say, well, I've done this basic course several times. I want an advanced course. One of the things that makes these course advanced is improvised techniques, or we call it sticks and
Absolutely.
rags,
Yep.
and it used to be that sticks and rags was a normal course that you taught in every TCCC course,
Yeah.
every refresher you went to. There was there was always some kind of improvised techniques class, and that was the norm.
Yeah.
Now it's less and less. So now when some Marine or some 11 Bravo says, "Man, I need an advanced medical course," I'm like, "I got something for you, buddy."
Yeah.
And you just back up and do what we used to do, the improvised techniques, because now you're not changing anything. You're still talking about basic TCCC.
Yep.
Now it's like instead of TCCC with all this pre-manufactured gear that makes
Yep.
everything so much easier to do. Now
Yep.
it's how do you do it if you don't have that?
Yeah.
That because a lot of what these guys are doing is their mission isn't necessarily to be in a team or a squad or a platoon or squad. Sometimes these guys are operating in really small, in really small units or
Yep.
teams, or maybe they're just traveling overseas, maybe not even on a mission, and something happens. So
Yeah.
what do you do when you don't have that gear with you?
Yeah.
You know,
And that was, so I can give you a great example of that. I spent time at a unit where we augmented a lot of other units that did some things, and I was assigned to a team that they didn't use any of the same gear. I was their medic, but they didn't use any of the same gear I had. So, I had cat tourniquets and soft tees, and at the time I still carried the old school Ranger ratchet. You know why? Because that thing never broke, never failed, always worked. I know it's not cool now, but it was okay then. It was my backup to the backup to the backup. But they were using a different type of tourniquet, and so I look at it. I'm like, I can make that work. And what I had to do for that rotation, for that 5 month rotation, is I had to carry what they were familiar with, and I had to make that work. And because if they were going to have to take care of me, I didn't want them to be like a hog looking at the wristwatch at a tourniquet or another device that they didn't understand how to use. And one of the things I did the first or second day with that team is I went through and I showed them everything in my aid bag. This is where these are, this is where these are. That was right at the time when junctional devices were coming around as well. So I'd started carrying the AHAT, because that's the abdominal aortic junctional tourniquet at the time. SAM was the one that was the SAM junctional was the one that was chosen. The problem with the SAM junctional is you had to know some anatomy and physiology. You had to know where the inguinal crease is and get it right on top of the right spot. As to where the AHAT is, I mean, everybody knows most people know where the belly button is. I can train someone to put on an AHAT because all of us can find a belly button. That was the landmark. So I spent my time, teaching these guys. It's like, hey, this is where this is in my aid bag. But the bottom line is I had to change my practice to be where they were, right? Because I was worried about my own survival. And if they go into my aid bag or they go into my IFAC and I have different equipment, I just wanted to make sure it worked. And it goes into, but this goes back to the manufactured piece, right? If any of these devices are out there and they're FDA approved, I'm saying a medic should know how to use it,
Yeah.
right?
I,
And that goes with
a medic should learn how to use. I mean, he should attempt to. You're never going to see everything. He should see all the main stuff that's out there.
yeah,
Even
yep,
if he doesn't carry it, he
yep,
should use it, learn how to use it, see what it is, and he should be proficient in sticks and rags. Man, that
absolutely,
guy should know how to everything that's pre-manufactured. He should know how to improvise all of that
all of
out
that,
of
yeah,
almost nothing.
absolutely,
And
absolutely,
non-medics should get that as an advanced course.
yep,
So if you're a medic and you're not doing improvised techniques, then you're not even covering the basics.
yeah.
If you're a non-medic and you want an advanced course, you should be doing improvised techniques.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that was frowned upon for a lot of while. I think
Yeah.
I look back over my career and it was 1999. I was on the DMZ in Korea with the 1st Battalion of the 506th Infantry. And yeah, we had a casualty event. This is one of those, again, someone was kind of forward looking. There was the Rangers were already kind of doing this where they were putting medical scenarios because General McChrystal at the time, or Colonel McChrystal at the time, said, we're going to shoot, move, communicate. And oh, by the way, we're going to evacuate casualties as one of we're going to expand that big three to the big four. And through Abrams Charter, where they take those good techniques and it goes out. I had an XO who was a Ranger Regiment guy, and along with all of our company commanders and everything. So we were doing casualty play in these events, and I take 3 casualties and I only have 2 litters and I got to move 500 meters. What are we going to do? All these guys are critical. You know, what the OCs, what the observer controllers wanted me to do was switch out my litters and carry, 2 people a couple hundred yards, come back with a litter, get another one, and move them
Yeah.
that way. And I'm like, we just assaulted this building. Hey, let's pop the hinges off that door. I'm gonna duct tape this dude to a door, and we're all gonna move together, right?
Yeah.
And I got dinged for it, but again, that improvising on the spot, so we could move as a unit together, and we weren't getting all strung out. And like I said, I took a little hit on that, but it was my first experience with, hey, I've got to make something happen, and I got nothing. I strapped him to the door. And it was like, well, that was the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, did it work? Yep. Then it wasn't dumb. So, but
Yeah.
I agree. I used to teach a class when I had my medics at the Civil Affairs Brigade under, where I would do that exact same thing. It's like, we're going to do everything with something else, right? We were doing
Yeah.
chest tubes with endotracheal tubes. We were doing chest seals. I had them improvising chest seals or using other things. They were using chest seals for, to hold all their other things in place, which, at the time, chest seals were like, we only use them to seal a chest. But, everybody knows now we sometimes use them to hold crikes in. Sometimes we'll use them
Yeah.
to hold chest tubes in. But we did everything with something else in that, we were being creative about what we were using for BVMs or how we were using suction devices or, just we did everything with something else. And you're right, that was another advanced, that to me was advanced. Advanced meant stepping back and learning how to function with nothing.
Yeah.
Um, one of the biggest tests that I used to like to do is hey, all right, medics, since they, you let a medic pack their aid bag however they want, and it'd be like, all right, everybody switch aid bags. You're not allowed to look inside them. Now you're going to run your lanes, and you had to figure it out, and that was like how many times there were times where I would work a casualty event, I'd go in somebody's IFAC and it was packed differently than mine. It's like, okay, I got to figure this out really quick, where they keep what. So there's a bunch of different ways to switch things up, and you're right. I think sometimes advanced might mean stepping backwards in time a little bit, especially now that we're
Yeah.
seeing, if we potentially have to go into a place where we have denied logistics, or denied air, or denied or contested logistics, am I going to get a resupply of my manufactured tourniquets? Am I going to get a resupply of my occlusive dressings that are made with hydrogel and manufactured? There's a good chance I might not get any of those things. So then
Yeah.
it begs the question, well, should we even go with that pre-manufactured stuff anyways? I think we
Yeah.
should, because
Or,
it's the
or
standard, but
yeah, or
yeah,
if you just, or even if you have plenty of gear, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have access to it right that minute, there's plenty of missions I was on that we were, pretty light on what we were carrying and far away from our kit,
yeah,
and so you just got to be ready to improvise. And I think so that was kind of, like I said at the beginning, implement, sticking with the basics, but putting it into a full mission profile. To me, that's advanced medical training. But second to that, it's bringing back in some of these improvised techniques, and I think that's, can't say enough about that. And my the next thing I would go to as far as improvise, and this is back to the, how I would structure some units training, that you asked way back in the beginning. It was probably like
yeah.
4 hours ago, I think. Uh, the the why is almost or sometimes more important than the how.
Yeah,
So we forget, we get so focused sometimes on teach them the basics, and they also need to have time to build muscle memory. So don't just teach them how to do a tourniquet, but make them do it, you know, 10,000 repetitions so that they get it
yeah,
down. You don't necessarily have all that much time. So yeah, you do have to be careful about how you focus your time. And it can't be teach the guy one thing in a 5-day course and make him do it
yeah,
over and over and over again. That the onus is somewhat on him and his unit to finish that training. But everything doesn't always have to be practical application either. Sometimes we underestimate how intelligent some of the new guys coming in now are, and so sometimes if there's certain things that it's almost more important to teach them why instead of how. Like
yeah,
hypothermia is a good example. No one would argue, or no legitimate medic would argue that hypothermia is not important. But if I had the choice, if I had some non-medics, we're talking, and I had a 3-day course, I'd spend a lot of time doing the basics and giving them some repetition so that they would understand how to go back to their unit and practice that more. But any other time I had, I wouldn't necessarily waste it on Prac App. I would
yeah,
spend more time giving them the why.
yeah,
Because I tell you what, man, you teach some 11 Bravo or some Lance Corporal why hypothermia is important.
yes,
That might be, that could be, if you can beat that into them in a 30-minute class, why hypothermia is so important. And I mean, go in depth. Don't assume he's a Lance Corporal Marine
yeah,
or he's an 11 Bravo trigger puller. They're too dumb to understand what my gigantic brain can.
right,
They get it,
yeah,
man. These guys are smart,
yeah,
and you teach them that, and they know the why. They might figure out a better how than you ever thought of.
yeah,
You got, and we saw that. We would have, uh, we'd be running courses, and I still remember, that, not to go too in, I won't mention the unit. It was a Marine unit, and not a soft unit. And we were teaching the TCCC course for him, and we were trying to, we're trying to dial it up a little bit and make it a little bit harder. These little STXs, and next thing I know, I see this Lance Corporal running with one casualty over his shoulders, and he's holding on to a litter with his other hand, and he doesn't have a shirt on.
Yeah.
and he's running by, and I'm like, what just happened? And the instructor tells me afterwards, like, the guy ripped off his shirt and started using it because they were running out of equipment, which we wanted him to. He
Yeah.
rips off his shirt, tears it, and started using it to help hold battle dressing, or help hold dressings on, like they were cutting
Yeah.
dressings in half.
Yeah.
Used one as a sling on a guy, and he knew what he had to do. He knew what the mission was.
Yeah.
So just tell them the why, and sometimes they'll figure out the how. We forget sometimes some of this modern medical equipment wasn't even designed by a medic.
No.
The Asherman chest seal, that guy was not I mean, he was a corpsman later, but he was not originally a corpsman. So these guys, these non-medics, man, they'll come up with some genius ideas for stuff. So
Yeah.
so
Or they'll take something that was used for something else, like hydrogel. Hydrogel was used to attach breaching charges to doors, right? And then the medics are like, hey, I can use that stuff to seal a chest. And then we came out with pre-done stuff, and then the breachers are using chest seals. No, but yeah, things come around. Everything, it's all full circle, and we end up using a lot of things. But you talked about something earlier. It's like you can't just practice something once. And I always love the saying, and I don't know where it's from, but I use it all the time, that amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals practice until they can't do it wrong. And that's kind of something that always stuck with me. It's like, you're right. I don't want guys doing that all day, every day, but I want them to do it until that muscle memory is there, and they almost can't do it wrong. Can you always screw it up? Yeah, you can always screw it up, but we want to get enough reps in to where it's a really hard for them to do it wrong.
Yeah, because at JSON TC, you got a year to make them practice. But at some of our training, these courses are 3 to 5 days long. I don't have enough time to give them those 10,000 repetitions.
Yeah.
But get it to where he knows it, and you give him a plan to go back to his unit and sustain himself with practical training. It's kind of like knot tests. The whole the knot test thing, blindfolded 30 seconds. So you get this knot that is, and you put a not unrealistic time limit on it, but a very tight time limit to get it tied in perfect conditions, and then you blindfold the guy. And I had people argue with me like, this is stupid. I will never ever have to tie a bowl in 30 seconds blindfolded. I'm like,
oh yeah.
I'll concede maybe you never do, but when you put restrictions on them like that, these difficult, 30 seconds for some of these knots is tough, man. You got to be moving.
Yeah.
But you put restrictions on them like that, and it forces that person to practice enough until he does do it. So you don't have to hover over him, because if not, if I just said, here's how to tie a bowline, anybody could figure it out. Let the guy sit there with a rope. He'll get it in an hour or two. Does that mean he knows how to tie it? That one particular snapshot in time he does, but the next day he doesn't remember. But I tell you what, anybody that's done a legitimate knot course, they don't forget those knots. The same thing's got to be said for medical training.
Yeah.
You have to come up with a way to force them to want to better themselves. With tourniquets, with me, it was always, I would give them certain things they had to do. They had to do it both hands, had to do it one hand, had to do it on each arm, had to do it in the dark, so just like what you were telling.
Yeah.
And then I'd put some really very, very difficult time limit that they had to get before they passed.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, this is stupid. I'm going to have more than 15 seconds to get the tourniquet on. I'm like, yeah, you might, but if I make you get to that level, that means you went home at night and practiced this thing probably 100 times every night for 3 nights in a row. So I'm not saying that's enough, but it got that guy to where now he's ready. he can remember it good enough so that next week when he's back at his unit, or a
Yeah.
month later back at his unit, he remembers it good enough to go practice it again, not mess it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just talk, tourniquet application. Let's just talk about the difference with a good arterial bleed. What's the difference between 15 and 30 seconds of
Yeah,
putting a
could be your
tourniquet on?
life.
That is
Yeah,
huge. It's huge. I mean, that's talking about, half a unit of blood potentially for what you're doing. So, it takes me back to, we did that too. Like everybody that grew up in the military, at least when I was coming in, you had 9 seconds to don and clear your protective mask,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I remember going through basic training, and that was like, man, it was like that was stressful. And then every time I had to do it, because I had to do it for expert field medical badge and a couple other, we used to do our annual skills refresher training, and we had to do it. But then when it became my job, one of the things that I used to do was casualty decontamination in the special operations world. It was like, dude, the standard dropped to like 3 seconds. You had 2 or 3 seconds
Yeah,
to put your mask on. And even that was easy. I mean, it was like a second and a half, to clear and seal your mask. Now, granted, the masks were better. I learned how they were fitted better. I learned how to use them better, but it's the same thing. I mean, you get the more you do it, the better you get at it. And especially if it's your job. So I'm going to switch gears for a second. I got a little timer running here, Liz. You'd be proud of me. But I'm going to switch gears for a second, Brian, because when we talk about basics, let's not just talk about the curriculum. Let's not talk about the devices that we're using. Now let's go in a different direction, which I can geek out on all day, and Liz knows that I can geek out on it. Let's talk about the simulation modalities that are important, because a lot of times guys think it's advanced, so I'm going to jump straight to cadavers, right? Or I need to be like on real humans. Can I do advanced training on, let's say, task trainers, or can I do advanced training with using AR and VR? And I've geeked out on what modalities are good for what at what levels. So talk to me about how you guys view medical simulation at T1G.
so and I'm going to sound like I'm a little bit all over the place. I'll go ahead and let me knock
Sure.
the cadaver thing out first.
Yeah.
A lot of units asking us for cadaver training. They think that is the advanced. That's like the pinnacle of it. Um, but it isn't necessarily. In some ways, that's uh, even a more basic thing. It's like using cadavers for anatomy and physiology.
Yeah.
Um, but and then in other ways, in some ways, we use cadavers. It is a more advanced training. Um, but just because it's something, cadavers are very, it's a not everybody gets to do cadaver training. It's very expensive, but
And
that make
heavily regulated.
yep, heavily
Yep.
regulated,
Yep.
and it's difficult to do. So people automatically associate that must be the best training you can do, and it necessarily isn't.
Yeah.
Um, but so that one's an easy one. Sometimes cadavers just mean you're really hitting the basic stuff. You're
Yeah.
dropping back down to anatomy and physiology training. Um, but then in some ways you're doing some more advanced stuff, which is somewhat sensitive in nature. But when it comes to some of the newer stuff like VR, AR, some of the simulation training, this is something me personally, but also T1G, we really wanted to stay out in front of. And even a few years back, we were really trying to push units to try to implement some of this. And in my mind, a good training course would be they sign up for a training course, and we send them curriculum way ahead of time, month,
Yeah.
2 months in advance. And that
Yep.
curriculum is all the classes they need, videos, somebody, real-time instructor feedback they can communicate with and ask questions, so that when they show up at your site, they've got the didactic portion out of the
Yep.
way. And they did it at a comfortable pace that they could really learn it. A lot of testing, so test their knowledge. A lot of visual aids, pictures, videos. So then when they show up to you, there's no need to really sit in a classroom. There, they can do all that online.
Yeah.
But the other thing we would want to implement is a lot of VR, AR training.
Hmm.
Get some of these these mannequins and these headsets where you're able to, like right now, we'll take people and moulage them up, and we'll give the guy a little STX. So he has to go through his patient care, apply all the techniques, and we put him in a little simulation training. But that's labor intensive and logistical intensive, because we got to have, op 4 role players, we got to have
Yeah.
smoke and all this other stuff to make it somewhat realistic, to dial up the pressure a little bit.
Yeah.
But you can do a lot of that with headsets. And
Yes.
and I'm not saying take away the real situational training exercise, but he can get one of those, and then it
It's a
takes me
good build
15,
up.
20 minutes to reset,
Yep.
where he takes that VR headset on, he can run through 6 or 7 of those, and it's just
Yep.
him and a guy running the computer. So we really wanted to push that. We wanted to get guys doing this, and some of them are better than others, but if they don't concentrate on, oh well, this didn't seem realistic because I was doing this. It's just going through the situational training exercise, going through the algorithm,
Yeah.
making sure they're doing everything right, giving them those critical thinking skills, because it can induce problems that they can think through.
Yeah.
They can get through so many of those in such a short period of time without all the logistical things that we have to do as T1G.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you can take your time when he's done 6, 7, 10 of those, and then put him through one with a human role player and some
Yeah.
operational opposing forces coming at him with simunitions, and instead of wasting that one where he's still kind of juggling the crawl walk run phase.
Yeah.
He's still in the crawl phase, and you just threw him into an STX.
Exactly.
So we really wanted to push these VR, AR. The pushback was the military. The military is just not really, they didn't take to it like we thought they would. A lot
Yeah.
of them are, we've had people tell us, I want my guys butt in the seat in your
Yeah.
classroom with your instructor in front of them teaching them,
Yeah.
and that's it. I want it all hands
Yeah.
on.
And that's kind of one of the things that we always talked about, especially so when I was at USASOC, I was a simulation nerd, and I talked at Soma one time, and really we came down to, there's all these different simulation modalities, and they're good for certain things, like the individual task trainers, like the guy that you intubate 1,000 times, for learning the right way to do it. Unfortunately, they don't teach you the wrong way to do it very well usually. But we always used to say, and everybody saw simulation as like this bad word, and it's like, look, anytime you're training, it's simulation. Because if you're not actually in combat with people shooting at you and your casualty dying in front of you, you're doing simulation, man. It's just a matter of what modality you're using, because you're right. Everybody wants to shoot straight for, yeah, I want to do a cadaver lab. Well, there's some issues with that. Cost, they're heavily regulated. Sometimes they don't always look like what our people look like, right? And then you run into, it's not, there is, I will preface this with, in all my years, I still have not seen the perfect simulation modality. In fact, I haven't seen one that comes even close to being a perfect simulation modality, right?
Yeah.
So are task trainers perfect? No. Are human role players perfect? They're pretty darn close. If you train them, they've got to be trained. That's the thing about human role players. They've got to be trained in how to act, how to give feedback, and otherwise it's just as good as what used to really be my pet peeve at the JSOMTC. Medic goes down and he's checking vitals, and the instructor, he says, I'm checking vitals, and he immediately gives him values. And therefore medics come out and they're like, what? Like, I ran lanes where a medic would be like, I'm checking vitals, and he turns and looks at me, and I just turn around and I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? It's like, you have a human there, or you have a simulation modality that will give you those numbers, but you've got to check them, right? And so we do finger drill some of those things at training, but yeah, I haven't found that perfect simulation modality yet. They all have strengths and weaknesses. So I think integrating them all. So that was kind of my question is, what do you guys use at T1G, as you go from that, between nothing and all the way up to a cadaver training. I mean, I know because I've worked with T1G before, we've used individual task trainers, we've used full body mannequins. Talk to me about how you integrate those into that training and those full mission profiles.
Yeah, I think you gotta use them all. You don't, if you're using a high fidelity mannequin, it doesn't make any sense to bring a high fidelity mannequin out to get runs on practicing how to do a crike. They have
Yeah,
crike trainers
exactly.
that you can,
I don't need the
you
full
know,
body for that.
yeah, and
Yep.
so you have to, uh, it has to be a mixture. You got to use it all, or else you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Now, some units do use it all. They'll come out, they'll do the task trainers. So,
Mhm.
they'll practice innovations, the crikes, the IO. We got little task trainers for the IO.
Yeah.
They'll use those, and then they'll put on the VR headset, get some runs through. So you're not necessarily using a task trainer, so it's maybe not the same getting the manual dexterity in, but they're going through the algorithms, and then we'll bring in some humans and moulage them up so that they can put those two things together and
Yeah.
um, and get kind of the more of the point of injury care all the way through, or whatever it is that they're doing, whatever level they're doing before we ever get to the cadaver. You shouldn't take a guy or you shouldn't take a unit and come right in and say, well, we're going to do a full mission profile and I want cadavers on the ground ready to
Yeah.
go. They should always do something. Otherwise, you're just,
Yeah.
you're putting them under a high pressure situation and wasting your time
Yeah. That's
with a
the
cadaver.
Super Bowl. That's your
Yeah,
Super Bowl, your culmination exercise. And even
yeah,
then, even with some of those cadavers, even with, it doesn't matter if you really want to do the training good, you almost always have to bring in another modality, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because even with cadavers, if you they have plumb cadavers where you can circulate blood through, and those systems are terrific. You can get a pulse, you can do all those other things, but they're not exactly portable, right? It's
yeah,
very difficult to run those things. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but and I agree with you. You've got to use a mixture, and
yeah,
it's got to be towards the audience and towards the scenario.
yeah,
I think, I kind of game this out with some other people that I've helped train and I've trained with. It's like, all right, what would a perfect training scenario look like? And what we really came down to, it for a single casualty, we maybe had at a minimum three simulation modalities, you
yeah.
know, integrated.
And, and you mentioned something about the instructor. That is the key that brings it all together. And I know
Yeah,
some of it's laziness, some of it's just, but that used to be one of my pet peeves is, you know, I'm I'm checking vitals, turn around, look at the instructor, and and we have to get away from that. You have to get away from the finger drilling stuff.
yeah,
If you're going to finger drill stuff, there's computer aids that you can just go down through. You can read
yeah,
over casualties, if you're going to finger drill it, man.
yeah,
So all these different modalities, like you're saying, if you're going to implement different stuff, it really comes back on the instructor. How good is that instructor? How much patience does he have? How willing is he to make sure that that guy is checking off all the things that he needs to learn and understand, and not letting him finger drill these
yeah,
things? That's the big thing, and that's why, going back to the beginning of this conversation, why, I said we try to make sure we're picking the right, and not just the best instructors, but the right instructor.
yeah,
Getting a guy that that understands what we're trying to teach. And I know we gave our full disclosure that, Dennis, you work with T1G a lot,
yeah,
but one of the things we bring you in for is the mannequins. Whenever we were running these mannequins, we would there's what is it, probably four guys, three or four guys that we bring in, and you were our lead guy on that,
yeah,
because we don't want to just stick anybody on the mannequins, because they're gonna may not, that instructor, no matter how good he is, he might be the best soft medic in the world. if he
Yeah.
doesn't know how to utilize that, it may not get the best training out of it.
Well,
So,
and that's what I learned. My opening line to that talk I did at Soma on medical simulation was, "Yep, my name's Master Sergeant Dennis Lyons, and I wasted I forget how many dollars on medical simulation because we were kind of pushed to buy some full body simulators, which we bought the best ones out there at the time."
yeah,
And we even bought a service contract, and we contracted to do training. The manufacturer will come out and do training. But what we found was that within 6 months of us doing that training, everybody that was in that training was either PCS or deployed,
yeah,
or they were just gone, or ETS or whatever. So, having maintaining those simulation, whatever you're using,
yeah,
and they all require maintenance. It doesn't matter whether you're doing task trainers, AR, VR,
yeah,
or cadavers, right? Or even those cadavers, you have to learn the protocols and the regulations and everything else to be able to run that training. So you're right. It's not just we've got to maintain that capability, and you've got to have the right people running it. And the reason I got there is because at some point I'd operated almost every mannequin that was in existence at some point. And who's done that really, really well? The medical simulation training centers in
yeah,
that the Army runs, right? Because they
yeah,
have dedicated staff, and they know how to use the mannequins, they know how to maintain the mannequins, and most importantly, they know how to reset them very quickly. Because
yeah,
what I always tell people is, it's like, all right, think about it. It takes 20 minutes to set the mannequin up, and it takes 20 minutes to reset. If I'm running 5 medics through and they have a 1 hour clinic, right? I'm now adding another basically an hour and a half onto my training day just in reset. That's fairly
yeah,
significant. And so yeah, it is one of those things. That's where we came through is, maybe it's almost better for us to contract these things out, but we've really got to focus on getting people trained to use them.
yeah. And
Um,
there's some good ones out there. And like you said, there's plenty of people buying these things.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if it's enough or not enough, but I can tell you the ones that are, once they do buy it, a lot of times they're not maintaining it, and that
yeah,
stuff sits there and falls apart and doesn't get
yeah,
used. It's a shame. So it's expensive. Put the extra effort. It's like if they were to, buy a Ferrari and then never put
absolutely.
gas in it or never change the oil and just,
Absolutely, because yeah, it is. That's the thing that we found. It's like you've got to flush the blood out of them.
yeah,
You've got to recharge the batteries. You've got to do all that stuff. It's almost a full-time job, to be honest with you. And I had
it
five. I
is.
bought I bought 5 or 6 of them for a brigade size element, and quite honestly, we ended up transferring them all to the Mystic because it's like we just couldn't maintain them, and I couldn't run them.
Yeah,
So what I did was I transferred them and said, "Hey, I need you guys to take care of these, and I'll send my people there to train." And it actually worked out pretty well. But it is, those are the things that I didn't see going into that whole thing. Um, but uh,
there,
but yeah,
there's coming a day when there's going to be the perfect simulation. One of these
I,
robots, one of these,
yeah,
this
I
Tesla
don't know.
robot is going to have. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
I
either.
I don't
It,
know.
it's it's getting better for
It
sure.
is getting better, but very slowly. And I think, my favorite, I think there's a different great simulation modality for each phase of care. And
Yeah,
for what I see, you're going to have to transition your simulation modalities by phase of care, right? So
yeah,
in that teachable C phase right now, I like the full body mannequins because they really focus on the 8 or 9 critical tasks that you need to do, like put
yeah,
on a tourniquet, like an airway, needle decompression, those sorts of things. And then when you get into your next phase, whether it's evacuation or in prolonged field care, my personal opinion, I really like a trained role player. I like
yeah,
a trained role player with a mixture of moulage and potentially, an AR VR type thing to get you that
yeah,
algorithm acquisition. So different phases have different things, and then when you get into the surgical side, because we assume that you're going to go from that phase of care into an evacuation of some point or a hold, and then you're going to get to a damage control resuscitation. There's good simulation things out there now to do that as well. So it's just, I think it's going to
Yeah,
be
and then
phases of
even
care are going to dictate.
yeah, and then even implementing cadavers into that, because we do some
Yeah.
of these training with these softies, it's these
Yeah.
guys. They want to they want to integrate their training into the point of injury care training. So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with taking a human role player or running these guys through TCCC to an evacuation phase to sticking a cadaver in there so that these surgeons can get in
Yeah.
there and practice their surgical skills and run into that. So I agree. There's not one thing that goes start to finish yet.
Absolutely.
Um,
And it's funny because, here in the civilian world, I work in the wound care side now, and we use cadavers as well. But the thing is, the people that we're using cadavers on, they deal with humans every day, and cadavers
yeah,
are part of their normal run, right? So if I
yeah,
take a surgeon who's a general surgeon who's doing open belly stuff, pretty frequently in a hospital, right? And what am I really doing? I'm just inserting him to do that exact same job in a tactical environment. So jumping to a cadaver for that level of training is absolutely, I mean, yeah, it's
yeah,
it's the right thing.
yeah.
But jumping immediately for those non-medic first responders, not really the right thing,
It's not, yeah, sometimes
or
a waste of,
less than optimal. Let's just say that.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
but yeah, so yeah, it will be, the one thing of all the companies that I've seen, and I've always been really impressed about how T1G mixes all those different simulation modalities to create a complete training picture. Because that's what I did for a while, and training people was kind of, getting the best training was important. And what I found is that you had to mix it up. You had to mix those modalities up. And, we
Yeah,
always used to think about, as I'm doing these, what is my goal? What's my goal of medical simulation? It's really to gain that emotive or that emotional response out of the participant, out of the trainee, that I
yeah,
don't get. Because one thing that no one ever really talks about for us as medics and doctors in hospitals, right? Imagine if a doctor in a hospital, that every patient he took care of, he knew intimately. He
yeah,
knew their kids. He was the best man at their wedding. Their families hang out together. That's not the case. And I think military medics and a lot of even first responders have a different take, because a lot of times these people that they're taking care of, they know very, very well, right?
yeah,
And so there's an emotive component there that you just don't get. You just don't get. It's very difficult in the simulation world. I had an idea that maybe we take some of our simulators and we name them after actual people and reproduce their injury
yeah.
patterns. And psychologists told me I was crazy and dumb. But that is, but it's the
We
same
can
thing when you
we
get
can
into
edit
those
that
high.
part out.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I know I'm with you. And there's when it comes to training, it's um, sometimes it's hard for the student, especially if he's done, either he doesn't care about medical training, he doesn't see it as a critical task,
Yeah.
or he's done a lot of it and he's kind of bored with it. It's hard to get them to focus. And, sometimes you have to start off with, hey, the guy to your left and right, that might be the guy you're practicing on. So,
Yeah.
or not, sorry, not practicing. The guy to your left and right that you're practicing on today might be the guy you have to do this on for real. So it's, you do have to kind of set the stage and get them in that, just like teaching a tactics course, you want to give them that combat mindset.
Yeah.
It's, hey, you need to be in the right combat mindset. Don't, the old days of training and you get shot and you're down. Well, that's not a good way to train, because now all of a sudden the guy thinks, well, if I get shot, I need to lay down and be down. No,
Yeah.
it's, you get shot, you need to just keep on going.
Yeah.
Keep driving on. So it's the same thing. You got to put them in that tactical mindset. Same with medical. You got to put them in that combat mindset and get them
Yeah.
ready.
Well, and that's the, as we do this, it's almost, some of our training, it's almost like a video game. It's almost like we're detached from it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just running through this. When medics are stressed the most, they're stressed the most when they're fighting against the grade sheet, right? When they've
yeah,
got an instructor there with a stopwatch and they're keeping track, that's when they're most stressed. And I remember going through the course and I wasn't so stressed because I knew I had plenty of time. Look, I was a medic already for 8 years before I went to the course, so it wasn't a big deal, right? And it wasn't much different than anything I'd ever done. But one of the things I always talk to people about is, for a while there in SOCMIS, you had to come and you had to brief a casualty scenario, right? You had to
yeah.
brief a casualty scenario you know, that you saw downrange or whatever. And I one class I briefed one, and it wasn't a very complicated one. It was pretty simple, no big deal. And then, later what they did is they incorporated those scenarios a couple of years later, where you would run scenarios every morning before class. So here I am, like maybe it might have been 4 years later. It was my very last SOCMAS, and and I'm running my casualty scenario in the morning, and I start running it, and they start giving me the feedback, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know this casualty
Sounds
scenario.
familiar.
I'm like, I'm like, and I got so nervous. And it was almost like I was in that moment running that casualty scenario again in real life. And
Yeah,
that's when it dawned on me. It's like, that's what we need to reproduce in training. Somehow we've got to reproduce in training that same feeling of me running that event when it was real.
yeah. It can't be, too often in training, the the guy knows that this is a mannequin or it's a
Yeah,
role player is not really hurt, and
exactly.
he's kind of like, well, guy's not really going to die, but if you can dial up that pressure on him, and um I mean, we don't have a way to like shock the patient and make them right.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
the guy starts getting shocked if you don't do it right. But
There's
if
actually, you joke about that, Brian. There's actually a company out there that's making something similar to that right now.
yeah. Well, if you can focus on that person, that medic or that non-medical operator, and make him, put him in the moment, make him feel like, if I don't do everything I'm supposed to, this guy could die. And
Yeah.
it's hard to replicate that.
Yeah.
It's
You
I mean,
know,
it's impossible to fully replicate it, but as close as
yeah.
you can get to it, that's the best you can do to get him trained up and ready.
Yeah. One of the things I always talk about when I talk about medical simulation is I talk about appropriate operational stressors as well. A lot of times we'll go into training and it'll just be loud noises and blast going off, and
Yeah,
they'll make smoke and strobe lights. And look, I got to be honest, I never provided
yeah.
casualty care in a rave. There were never strobes. There was never
Disco ball.
smoke. Yeah, there were no disco balls. You know what the most stressing, what the worst operational stressor I'd ever seen and that I was able to do to medics that were training? It was
Think about.
silence.
Oh,
It was silence.
uh, yeah. I was gonna say,
No
one of the.
feedback, no
Yeah, I was gonna
feedback,
say.
no talking, no nothing. The medic asks you a question, you just stare at them.
Yeah,
Or if they ask for anything, you're just like, what is he looking at? It's like, dude, it's you. Because I realized one time
yeah,
the worst I ever had was I was taking care of a casualty in Korea, and I had a first sergeant and a commander that were over my shoulder, like, Doc, what are you doing? What's this? And that was the closest I ever came, but that wasn't helpful. And then I asked them to leave, right? Because I needed the work. But it's that silence it's, as one medic said, that silence is deafening sometimes. So
yeah. Hang on, I'm writing that one down. I like that.
yeah, that silence as an operational stressor is the worst, because I always,
I like that.
even the Army did it in that BCT-3, the guys that used to do the pre-deployment training, they had strobe
Yeah,
lights and music and smoke. And I'm like, I've never done any of
yeah,
this. So,
yeah. I think I was gonna
Liz,
say one of.
I've never raised my hand uh,
Oh,
on this podcast, and I actually thought that we would have made it the whole way through without me talking. But
yeah,
that, Dennis, is genius and is
yeah, I like
something
that.
that I am in the field every single day. You know that, right?
yeah,
And all of this simulation. I sell simulation. I own a company selling simulation. Believe me, please buy all the high fidelity shit you want, right? The only difference between me and everybody else is that I tell you not to, right?
Yeah.
And everybody in the world says to me that the most major, important, hardest thing they've ever had to deal with when it comes to muscle memory, high stress level, being on the spot is silence.
Yep.
Yeah, and I wrote that down. Got a little note from my guys. I was gonna
Yeah.
say one of a good one is if you know you're gonna get rolled. That's why
Well,
JSON
that too.
TC, yeah,
Yeah.
they don't need to
That
do
too.
JSON TC in those trauma lanes. They don't need to do anything. That guy knows
Yeah.
if he
That.
fails, he's getting rolled. So they don't
Yeah.
need any
Absolutely.
stressors.
But it takes me
I
back.
like
It
that
takes
one.
me back to someone used to ask me because I used to run through the lanes and I just looked like I was nonchalant, like I didn't care. I did the same thing in Jump Master School where it's a very similar algorithm directed thing. And look, I'm great at memorizing stuff. And I used to just tell people that someone, since Liz said a bad word, I can say one too. They're like, Doc, how do you stay so calm? And I'm like, I just act like I don't give a shit. It's like on the inside, I really do, but outwardly, I just act like I don't give a shit. Right. And
Yeah.
so I'm my ashes in the aircraft. We're flying people out of the aircraft, and I'm going through my algorithm, my sequence. That sequence was like 10 steps versus a trauma lane, which is like 120. Right? It's nothing. I do this in my sleep, and I go through my algorithm, and I kick the guy out the door, and the instructor goes, you know, number whatever my number was, number 10, you're a no go. I just shrugged my shoulders. I'm like, okay, cool. I went back up in the aircraft. He's like, do you know what you did wrong? And he gave me some bullshit excuse. I'm like, whatever, dude. Right. And I went back up in the aircraft and I'm like, well, I'll go do it again. And again, I went through it like I just didn't give a shit because it's 10 steps and I can do it. Later, that instructor comes to me and he's like, hey, man, you did nothing wrong that first time. He's like, I just wanted to see what you would do if you would actually fail because I heard you say when someone asked you why you're so calm, I just acted like I don't give a shit. And I had to explain to him, it's like, I do give a shit. I'm just acting like I don't because the moment it's the most important thing in my life, I'm going to screw something up. Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right. He's like, well, did I get a go? Did I do it right my second time? He's like, yeah, you did it right both times. He's like, I just wanted to see what you would do if I failed you, and I was like, you're a dick. You could have found another way to do it. But it was, but that's the other way that everybody's like, man, you run through these scenarios and you just act like you don't care. It's like, yeah, because I act like that. I do care, but it's important not just for me, but for people outside to, as a medic, you've got to display some calm in your life. Um, so yeah.
For
So
sure, and
yeah, Liz,
that's
that's
one that's yeah that's one that's difficult to teach somebody. It's hard to.
absolutely.
You hope they have that, but you can. That's one of those things you could try to impress upon them, but
Yeah.
probably difficult to teach somebody that.
Yeah. But you just do it enough and it's like, you know, so yeah, so I think we're coming up on time. It's been a roller coaster. We've laughed, we've cried. It's been a roller coaster of emotions. Um, Brian, any parting words from Brian and T1G?
Yeah,
Uh,
Brian. Brian, give it to us. I mean, this is A, you're winning a medal. I might fly it with a drone over to your spot because for me to be on mute for that long was such a big deal. But
Yeah,
Dennis,
yeah,
thank you because you're the fucking bomb. So thank you so much.
thanks.
And I realized that I'm the only one who cusses on this show. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought that we were in the military. Anyway, so okay, sailor, shipmate, give us something. Give us your final thoughts.
so I would first off, thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it. If we had Dennis, you and I can sit around talk for
We
hours and
could we could have
days, and
gone for another 3 hours. Yeah,
but
absolutely.
but
I agree.
it, in the end of the day, um, I do believe in sticking with the basics, and that's why I gave you the punchline right up front. I think if you're out there and you're wondering what you can do to take medical training more serious, or take medical more seriously, not medical training, medical. If you can do anything to take that more seriously, focus on the basics, implement it into all your other training, and include everybody in your unit. That means from the lowest guy to the senior guy, put it in all the other training you do, no matter what it is. Bring your comm in, your weapons in, put it all together. That's the only way to really do advanced medical training, and stick with the basics. And when I say stick with the basics, I throw in, go back to the sticks and rags, man. Make sure you can do everything you need to do with the most rudimentary equipment. And then the third thing is just the mindset. Keep that. We do it in every, or we should be doing it in every other aspect of our training, is focusing on a good combat mindset. You got to do the same thing with medical. You got to be prepared. You got to have in your mind that you're ready for casualties at any time, and everybody in your unit's ready for it, and focus on that. And I think that is it, man. If we've got smart guys out there, so make sure they know, if they know the why, they'll figure out the how. So educate your guys and stick with the basics.
It's awesome. How about you, Dennis? You got anything closing?
I'll do that same thing I said earlier in the podcast. Amateurs practice till they do it right. Professionals practice till they can't do it wrong. So I'll leave you with that.
It's awesome. Hey guys, Liz Art's here again. You've never heard me be on mute. Very proud of myself. So I'll just unmute myself to say that 10 times and pat myself on the back. Thank you so much to Dennis Lyons and to Brian Gerard from Tier 1 Group. I have never endorsed a training group in my life. I have a lot of trainers that I work with. I couldn't imagine, for the listeners that are both stateside and overseas, that you would not first consider being with this group. It is what I've learned today. I'm sure you feel the same way, is unbelievable. And there's so much to listen to that I'm going to watch it probably 10, 15 times. These two guys are absolutely excellent. But Brian, I thank you, and I thank your company for coming on. You have been a medical force in training since the early days, and if you come out with a podcast called Sticks and Rags, I'm going to be really pissed, because it sounds a lot like Splints and Whiskey. Sounds a lot like Splits and Whiskey, but it Sticks and Rags. I
Right.
think if we could just join forces, I'll make it all together. Okay, damn it. But
It's yours. Take it.
I love
Yeah.
you. Okay, I love you. But
Yeah.
disclaimer, I didn't know him. I sought after
Yeah.
them because of how high caliber their training facility is, and their trainers are. And that's what
Yeah.
you're seeing today. So I'm asking the listeners, if you want to know anything about either one of these two guys, but mainly about Tier 1 Group, T1G they call it, then reach out to me, thelizarts.com, or Liz is my email, liz@thelizarts.com. Not hard to remember, it's my name. So just reach out, and it's the best way to find me. And I'm going to connect with these guys. You guys, this was awesome. I want to wish you a happy holidays, whether it's Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, happy whatever. But for the next 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, this is going to be rolling, because
Cool.
this continues to need to be downloaded. And I'd love to have a second time, because I feel like we got into a section. I feel like we got into like we're in a mini series, and that we got into section 2. And I think we could do it again in a couple months. I really do.
Yeah.
So
All
thank you
right.
both for your time. Stick with me for a second. And Splints
Yeah.
and Whiskey listeners, happy holidays. God bless. Have an amazing New Year, New Year's Eve. And we will catch up with you on the next Splints and Whiskey. But in the meantime, look up Tier 1 Group, Dennis Lyons. Always follow him. And then, of course, you know me, the Lizards. We'll talk to you soon. Peace out.